Well, can you tell us a little bit of your miraculous story?
Well, let's see. I guess we'd start back when my parents adopted me in 1964. And we don't have a lot of information, but I was born about 2.5 months premature with cerebral palsy. Back then, a lot of babies didn't make it, but I guess the Lord had plans for me because here I am. And the doctors even tried to talk my parents out of adopting me, and they said such things as, oh, she'll probably never walk, she'll probably never talk, she'll be a vegetable. And at one time I did walk with 2 canes, and hopefully after I get treatment for arthritis, I'll be back to walking with the canes. But obviously the doctors were wrong, and I went on for a number of years. I went on to college and worked at an insurance company, and then had my own tax business. I had to pare down in recent years because of disability, but I didn't. My parents always taught me, 1, love of the Lord, and 2, never let my disability stop me.
Amen.
And a lot of times, if somebody just said to me, oh, you can't do this or that, just being told I couldn't do this or that was enough to encourage me to go and do it anyway. Our timing and God's timing are very different things.
Right.
And now that I'm older, He's opened the door, so I'm just falling through,
Yeah.
And so when I was taking care of my mother, I was reading my Bible one day, and someone had given me this angel with joy in the skirt. And I'm just contemplating the word joy, and what came to mind was in Psalms, weeping may endure for a night, but joy cometh in the morning. And I had to grab paper and pencil so fast, it was like I couldn't write it down fast enough, an outline, and I never even dreamed of writing an adult novel, If somebody would have told me 5 years ago, I'd have written, I'm thinking you're nuts, okay? But I worked on it while my mother would be resting, and then everything got put on hold when she passed. And then the Lord opened the door for it to be published, and, here we are. But when I was growing up, like I said, there were a lot of things that went on. Not only that, but when I had a number of surgeries as a kid so I could get to be walking. And then when I had my last surgery, and it should have been a textbook surgery for lengthening of hamstring muscles, which, are under the knee. It should have only been an hour or 2, but I was one of the first ones to go down that morning from that ward in Children's Hospital, but I was the last one to get back up that day because they found out that I had an allergy to one of the drugs and I had trouble waking up.
Yeah.
And they couldn't wake me up. And they tried everything and nothing was working. They even used a defibrillator that they use on people that have a heart attack, and it didn't wake me. And my parents thought something was really wrong. The nurses had been calling throughout the day to try and get answers to the operating room, and that's something you don't really do, but they were trying to get answers and nothing. So my parents went to the chapel in Children's Hospital, and my dad was sitting behind my mother, and they were both praying, and no one else was in the chapel at the time. And my mother turned to my dad and said, how do you know she'll be all right? And my dad looked at her and said, what are you talking about? I didn't hear anything. And the Lord, or an angel, must have whispered into her ear that I would be okay. And she said, well, we got to hurry up and get back to the ward. And I was being brought down. Then a couple of days later, they were told what had happened because an anesthesiologist spoke with them. But my dad was always a creature of habit, like checking times and all that, and he looked at the time on his watch. Well, when they met with the anesthesiologist explained all this that had happened, and when they had all these doctors working on me and nothing was working, everybody was standing around wondering who was going to tell my parents that their only child had died at age 12.
Wow.
They said, I just woke up. And I do remember it like yesterday. I can remember laying on the gurney and then talking to the doctors. And funniest thing, I remember I was feeling a little bit sick. They had to get a nurse quick, but I remember laying there and all at once let out this big burp, and there was a doctor that was by a baby's crib. He must have jumped like 3 feet off the floor. But I can remember it vividly, like it just happened yesterday. Okay. Yeah. But I didn't learn till many years later when my mom and dad told me just everything that did go down. But the interesting thing about the anesthesiologist, I think to myself, you know, people are getting away from prayer so much. He said he was a Christian, and the exact moment that I opened my eyes was the time that someone had whispered into my mother's ear that I would be okay. Yeah. He said from there on, before he went into the operating room, he was going to pray silently for anyone being operated on. If everybody in hospitals and so on would do that, that would be wonderful.
You know, when did you become a Christian? What's it like walking with the Lord right now?
Well, it's interesting when you're standing on the promises, but you can do it sitting down too.
Yes. Sitting on the promises, rolling with the Lord here.
Yeah. Well, I always felt close to the Lord, but I remember when I was a teenager, there was a Bible study at a friend's house in Wimber, and I was just sitting there thinking, gee, I don't ever remember asking God to forgive me my sins. So I did it right then, but I don't remember the date. Mm-hmm. But I always did feel close to him.